You're listening to Cinema Rex. That's right. It's an Iranian film podcast. Episode 27, Bahram, Beyzaie's The Stranger and the Fog.
And it's our 1-year anniversary.
Nice. I got you something. Did you get me something?
I did not. Did you actually get me something?
No. We'll do it on the 5-year.
I got you this pen.
Nice. I want it then. You can't. Now it's officially mine.
Okay. And you'll always know it's from me because there's wood on the pen.
Durud bar shoma dustan aziz. This is the Cinerex podcast where we talk all things Iranian cinema, film, television, art,
Coffee flavored beverages,
strangers, fogs,
yep,
samurai style fighting scenes.
It's being a little generous.
So, okay, I want to start by thanking everybody who came out to the American Cinematheque for the Strangers and the Fog screening that we got to do as part of the Friend of the Fest. I also want to give a shout out and thank you to Afra Nariman, who helped facilitate the entire process, was very kind, courteous. He served as a great host.
He's a wonderful host. Great host.
We haven't had a podcast in a while because we sort of backlogged a bunch of episodes at once, and then Tiff got in the way from recording. So people who are listening to this now, at this point, it might be like a month since we did the screening. So Farhan, what did you think of in our classic series of Farhan, what did you think of the American Cinematheque screening event that we held?
The event was awesome. Apparently we oversold.
We're one of 2 films that did, right? I think
2 films sold out. One of them was the opening night film of the first night of the festival. And they were like a pretty big podcast show. But ours oversold. They were like, we don't know how, but somehow there's like more tickets were sold than seats in the theater.
Well, it's Iranian party buzzy, you know?
Yeah, probably. I don't know if the American Cinematheque wants me to say that, but I think it's a badge of honor. But also, classic Iranian move. A lot of the people showed up 20, 30, 40 minutes into the movie and were like,
oh, yeah.
And like, we're still trying to get in.
Yeah.
And Afra was like, we had to be like, 1, there's no seats left.
Yeah.
2, you're 40 minutes into the movie.
Yeah.
You're not going to know what's going on and you're going to disrupt the other people watching. And some people got really upset.
Well, and also like, shout out to Afra because he was one of the most excited about the screening. He had not seen the film. He hadn't seen any previous version of the film because he was like, no, this is the Janus 4K restoration. I want to watch this movie properly.
Yeah.
And then the poor guy didn't get in.
Yeah.
He gave up his seat for like someone in the audience and he hasn't seen the film to this day.
And even after that, he was telling me this yesterday because he had told us, oh, there'll be 2 more screenings. I'll see one of those. Yesterday, I was asking him if he wanted to join us for the podcast. And he's like, I haven't seen it yet. I was like, what do you mean you haven't seen it? He's like, well, the other 2 screenings that they showed, I was also busy, so I couldn't watch it.
Poor guy.
He's a hard worker.
He's a very hard worker. He's going to be running this town one day. Yeah, I thought it was a really cool screen. I mean, it was a cool experience. You and I got to go up and speak for 5 minutes before talking about why we chose this film.
Yeah. I don't know. You know what I didn't realize until I was listening to it is your voice sounds so different when you're speaking in front of a crowd than the way that you normally speak.
I was way more nervous than I thought I'd be, which is really strange because I've done Second City.
I was surprised.
I've done live improv shows. It was really weird because I'm not afraid of speaking in front of a crowd. But if I get like somehow too excited about something in my head, it's that general, like, I'm not nervous about this, but like my endorphins are kicking in and my fight or flight response suddenly kicked in. And I wasn't like mentally getting anxious. I was chemically getting anxious. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So we are doing Bahram Beyzaie's sophomore film, The Stranger and the Fog.
Just for the ESL listeners on the podcast, what does sophomore film mean?
The second in the line of a collection. Sophomore year in high school is your grade 10, if you're going through 9 through 12. We had the privilege of watching the Janus restoration of this film.
Yeah.
Because you and I have both seen the older version, which was previously the only way you could see this film, which is in awful VHS quality that's been like a VHS
it's virtually unwatchable.
Yeah, it's like a rip of a VHS, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, because it's like weirdly cropped too. So like
weirdly cropped.
You're missing a bunch of stuff.
And like, what's the term? You're the tech guy. Like, what's it called when the entire thing's faded in this pinkish hue? Because it's like really pink too, but it almost feels like it's like been stained. You know what I mean? Like it's like the film reel they used had been like ruined because the entire film has this pinkish hue over it.
Yeah, there's like a weird tint and like the whole thing's pixelated. It's weird because the whole thing has that analog like VHS look to it, as if it was like recorded off of an old tube TV. Those CRTs are like really thick, chunky TVs.
Yeah.
It almost feels like someone was playing it on a TV, then someone set up a camera and pointed it at the TV,
Yeah.
recorded that, then it was digitized, and then it was like recorded at like way too low resolution and then stretched bigger. Like it feels like someone tried to make it look terrible.
Like actively went out of their way.
Yeah. They like dragged the film through the mud, put it through a projector. Like it does not look good.
So I feel like with Janus's restoration here, they're eventually going to release this on some sort of Criterion Blu-ray or something.
Yeah, I would imagine.
So I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen this film, waiting until that happens. But if you really are a Bahram Beyzaie scholar and you haven't seen the film in a long time, it is available on YouTube, just not at a recommended quality. You literally just type in Stranger in the Fog. You can see actually a side-by-side comparison of like the trailer for the restoration, and then you can see the full movie there at a lower quality, and your eyes will bleed.
Yeah. Right now, the only way to see it is if you go to the Janus Films website. It's janusfilms.com/film/2209. There's like a button there where you can book to have the film screened at a local theater. So if you want to see it and there's like a local art house theater to watch it at, you could actually contact them and be like, hey, we have enough people who want to see this. Can you use this form to like book it? And the book button is literally just the email to Janus Films.
Maybe we should do it in Toronto. We'll have enough people who want to see it.
Oh, yeah, you know what? We totally do. We should do like a Mehmouni or something and get one going.
So let's dive into it. The Stranger in the Fog by Bahram Beyzaie, the 1974 sophomore, or second in line of a collection. One of the most mysterious and majestural films of the Iranian New Wave, Bahram Beyzaie's visionary 1974 drama, The Stranger in the Fog, begins with the titular stranger named Ayat, arriving at a coastal village aboard a drifting boat, unconscious with no memory of how he arrived there. The villagers revive him, and after acclimating to a new life and being accepted by the villagers through a series of trials and tests of strength, falls in love with a local widow, Rana, whose husband had been lost at sea and presumed dead for over a year. Ayat and Rana's growing infatuation with one another begins causing tensions with her deceased husband's family. Villagers ask Ayat to marry someone to cement his place in the village, but he chooses Rana, leading to more discord within the community. On the night of their marriage, a wolf is attacking the village, and Ayat is approached by a mysterious man from his past. Whether this is the specter of the dead husband or a forgotten remnant from Ayat's past, the threat is made clear to Ayat. Fearing his shadowy past might come to haunt him, this drives Ayat to increasing paranoia as he begins preparing the villagers for war against an unknown force. As the quiet routine begins to return to the village, Rana tries desperately to convince Ayat that the threat he thinks is real is imagined and completely in his head and driving them all crazy. Ayat is convinced that whoever these strange men from his past are, they will return to take him away and wreak chaos up in the town. Despite all advice from the people who've grown to love Ayat, Ayat continues to prepare himself and the town for a war that might not come, until one day a very real threat shows up on shore. This film has no Rotten Tomato score and no audience score because I don't think anyone's really watched it in the last 40 years.
Yeah. When you asked people in the audience how many people had seen this film, do you remember how many hands went up?
Yeah, I think it was approximately third, and that was more than I thought.
A third of the people said they had seen it or that they had seen Beyzaie movies?
I think it was about a third. It was more than a third for Beyzaie films.
Oh,
I
wow.
think half of them.
Yeah, I think it was about half for Beyzaie films. I thought it was less for this movie.
Maybe it was like a fourth.
Maybe.
It was like more. I was surprised with both answers. It was way more hands than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
There was a lot of older audiences too who might have seen it wrong.
Yeah. I loved hearing the reactions of the people who like didn't know anything about the movie afterwards.
Yeah.
They like didn't know what to think.
Yeah. There was a mixed response between people who thought it was a little, I don't know, what's the word? Like, it was like, it wasn't what people expected. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, his style is a little campy, and we've talked about this before.
It's a mix of everything.
Yeah.
Like, he just blends 17 different feelings into one.
Yeah. It's funny because each time I watch one of Beyzaie's movies, I have like a different weird comparison to make. So prepare yourself, Cobbin.
Yeah, this time you thought of Weekend at Bernie's.
Yeah, Weekend at Bernie's. No, this style felt like a lot of those old epic like 50s and 60s movies. Think like Cecil B. DeMille or like William Wyler, like 10 Commandments, Ben-Hur, with like a bit of a Miyazaki flair added to it.
Mm-hmm.
But you definitely still have that like Beyzaie pinch thrown in there where sometimes the reactions are a little bigger, or sometimes the shot is a little bit on the nose and all that. It's not a criticism. It's just that's his style. His style is just a little more camp.
Yeah.
And to me, it definitely feels like if something like Ben-Hur or Ten Commandments was directed by Sam Raimi.
Oh, yeah.
With like Miyazaki doing the storyboards.
You still feel the Sam Raimi elements, huh?
I definitely do, because it's just like stylistically it's similar, like their voices. And to be fair, Beyzaie has been making movies way longer than Sam Raimi has.
Right. It's such a weird thing for a second film to be such a departure in tone from Downpour. I mean, in some ways it's the same tone, but it's like his first film being a contemporary rural urban setting about this guy in love who moves to Tehran and falls in love with a woman. He's a teacher. And then this comes off like a Seven Samurai-esque folklore story.
Yeah,
this
for
might
sure.
as well be a fairy tale of a guy who washes up on shore. You're in a strange land. It's got Alice in Wonderland vibes.
Yeah.
It's a community like.
Well, his first movie is definitely like it's like a European absurdist like rom-com with like some slapstick, right?
Yeah.
It's black and white. The shot compositions are nice, but they're not like it's nothing that you would like print and really put up on your wall, save for a couple shots here and there. This movie, like shot after shot after shot, you could like print those screenshots and like put it up on your wall. It's like beautiful from beginning to end. And like you said, it has that fairy tale vibe, which is very much in style with like what people came to realize later. Beyzaie is like a scholar of mythology and story.
Yeah. I mean, I would just disagree with you on Downpour. There's so many moments in that film I would frame on my wall. Mostly the Paramount and Masumi scenes.
Oh, that's funny.
Well, I like black and white photography. Like, I'm just like a sucker for it. So
no, I do too. Like in Downpour, it's like you're watching the movie and every once in a while you're like, wow, that's a beautiful shot. Mm-hmm. Like the one with all the kids in the tree or the wide shot in the hall or whatever. But in this, it's every single shot, even the inserts, the close-ups, the wide shot, every single shot. You could pause the movie at any point and print off a photo. But
the thing I really like too is, like I said, there's the fairy tale element of it. And at one moment, it feels like you're watching some Dr. Seuss alternate universe of like alt history Iran or something.
Right, yeah.
But then when they go in and there's a scene where like Ayat and Rana have this like almost like marital dispute about like, do you still love your ex-husband? Right? Mm-hmm. That all of a sudden feels like a David Mamet play. Like the dialogue that they're saying is very real and contemporary, which I like. Mm-hmm. It's almost like this guy's all of a sudden in this fight, this fight they're having in this house, this argument rather, it's a story about jealousy. Like he's jealous. And that feels like something out of like any modern play. You know, even though the setting was like fairy tale, it's just like here's this like very real modern familial argument.
Right.
Which I just like how he blends. His settings are always a mix of legendary and historical, contemporary and ancient, urban and rural.
Yeah.
Like I had mentioned in our speech, like even the setting of this like village, it can both be somewhere north of Iran or like nowhere in particular at all.
Yeah.
It's just like ephemeral, the setting.
Yeah. It definitely felt to me like they're kind of nowhere.
Yeah. Or also anywhere, like everywhere.
Yeah.
Like
yeah. Or also anywhere. And like, The interesting thing to me about this movie is like if Beyzaie was the type of guy to make sequels and prequels, mm-hmm. he could make a very interesting and compelling prequel to this movie and or an interesting and compelling sequel to this movie.
Yeah.
Like it's such an interesting premise that you're just like thrown into the middle of a story in this rich world that has its own geography, its own religion, sort of, its own like rituals and laws and rules and decorum. Yeah. Even the clothing and the dancing, like it's all super unique and interesting. Like if I'm curious for a lot of the non-Iranians who are watching the movie or people who are not familiar with the Iranian culture, how many of them watched this movie and just assumed that this was like the cultural practices of some village in Iran? Because it's so well thought out that like you would just assume it's a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I just want to reiterate the thing you said about the clothing. I thought the clothing was so fascinating. Like, I almost feel like the costume designer of this film is like Oscar worthy.
Yeah.
Like when they're doing that, remember that one scene when they're watching like a ceremonial play?
Yeah.
Like there's a theater and like they're wearing those like really crazy like straw hat outfits, and then someone gets stabbed and they pull red ribbon out of their like body to make it seem like blood. I'm like, this is so cool.
Yeah. He has a background in theater as well, right?
Right. And like we mentioned one episode prior, he like studied a lot of Japanese and Chinese theater.
Yeah.
He was the first Iranian scholar or writer to publish books in Iran in Farsi on Japanese cinema and Chinese cinema.
Yeah.
So like you can see that there's some of the influence in these plays that he's putting, right?
Yeah.
The plays within the movie. I mean,
Yeah.
and also there's this thing that I kept finding myself drawn to, and I mentioned it in our previous speech, was Beyzaie still is really widely considered a pretty impenetrable director in terms of his style. Like not everybody can get on board with his, like I remember we spoke to, we're going to name drop here, but Mr. Navid Nehraman came to our screening.
Yeah. Navid
right?
was there.
The famous actor. And I asked him afterwards what he thought. He's like, well, yeah, it's a beautiful film. And then he paused. He's like, lot to unpack there. I'm like, yeah, there's a lot to unpack because it's a film that you can't immediately have. I mean, I feel like it's the kind of like, it's like absorbing a good book and then you have to take it with you and like really think about it over a couple of days and discuss it with friends.
Yeah.
It is not all surface level. There's a lot of room for interpretation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of room for discussion. What do you think it meant when he made this?
Yeah.
This isn't, and that's what this podcast is for. But I just like that about his style.
I just want to reiterate that how bad the version online is, just to discourage people from like going to watch that version.
Yeah.
Try to organize a screening in your local town. It is worth seeing, or wait for Janus to like finally release this. And it's Janus, Janus. It's not some lady named Janice.
Yeah, not Janus from HR.
Yeah, or Janice from Friends.
Yeah. Have you noticed how many like wide shots there were of showing the entire community? Like a shot that probably there was like maybe 50 people in the shot. It's like a far back shot. It's like crowds and crowds of people, each doing their own thing, like the choreography of 50, 60 people from the town all coming together, converging together to like see what's happening. Or like a marketplace scene.
Yeah.
Those are like technically really difficult shots to shoot outdoors on an island.
The dolly shot over the river was really cool.
Yeah, over the river.
Or a crane or dolly, something like that. I don't know.
That's the stuff that made me think of the Kurosawa. It's like the Seven Samurai is a reference this movie gets a lot.
Yeah.
Of like these like wide shots. And also, again, like the film just starting off as a simple, it's like starts off as a very simple fable, you might say.
Right.
About like just a traditionalist community. And they're paranoia because this stranger has arrived on the boat.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have memory. So you're like, oh, wait, how's this mystery going to play out? But then once he wins over the community and becomes part of the community, there's a new threat and his paranoia about the thing. It's like this constant like circular thing of like the stranger. There's always a new stranger coming to the community.
Yeah.
And the fog being like, you can interpret the fog as like, it's like the way we're not able to like connect with one another, like a metaphorical fog. There's a fogginess between these people, the way they see each other.
Yeah.
And isn't it funny how much, as I'm saying this right now, this feels like Downpour too. Like it's stranger comes into the community, causes a bunch of discord.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he's obsessed with
and Bashu. Yeah.
And Bashu, literally the little stranger.
Yeah.
But he's very attracted to this idea of like stranger entering a community, causing discord and then disrupting the natural order of things.
Yeah.
Which is really prophetic if you think about the fact that he made these films in the 70s.
Yeah.
And what was to come at the end of the 70s.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes in trivia. One of the main important things that I think we didn't touch on too much, I think we just briefly talked about it, was this film, as soon as the revolution happened, was banned for decades after the Islamic Revolution. And this falls into the stuff that I had mentioned last time with behind the scenes trivia, is that the Islamic regime made an active effort to destroy all of Beyzaie's films.
Right.
So this wasn't as dire where like literally Downpour had one final copy left that Scorsese's company like saved. This still had a few copies left, but again, one of the reasons why this is so inaccessible to this day, now thanks to Janus we can get a version of it,
right,
was because there's very few copies out there left.
I'm curious what their official reasoning was for like banning Beyzaie's films.
I don't know. It's a good point.
He came from a Baha'i family.
Yeah.
And I don't know at what point he like left the Baha'i faith, but like at that point, like he's already on their radar.
Yeah.
And especially early on in the revolution, they were like, my mom's degree got revoked. She had already like gone to school, gotten her degree, and they were like, hey, you're ineligible for your degree now because you're a Baha'i and you're not allowed to work. And then like other Baha'is were being executed, were being tortured, were being thrown in jail, not allowed to go to university. So like for this guy, even if he recanted, I think it doesn't matter because to them, they're like, whatever, bro, you were an apostate.
Yeah.
You're lucky we don't kill you, but you can't make movies anymore.
Yeah.
They could have seen this movie and seen it as like blasphemous or as like pagan too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because there's nobody's holding a Quran in the movie. There's nobody like praising Allah. You know, there's no like.
Well, there is one point where they do they do their morning prayers.
Oh, do they? I don't remember.
Which was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so they have some form of religion here, and it is like somehow inspired by or born out of Islam, which might also be a reason why they were like, this is heresy.
Maybe. Usually behind the scenes when we do director, I'll go into a lot of biography, but since this is our third Beyzaie film, if you want to know about more of his like personal life and stuff, you could just listen to the Bashu episode or the Downpour episode where we talk a lot about his like life before making this film and how he got into it. I'm going to skip over a lot of that for today's episode. I just wanted to know your thoughts on this. One of the reasons he didn't consider himself true like Baha'i was because he was way more fascinated in like the blending together of cultures and spirituality, and he was really fascinated with like how people come together when they mix together, like his plays, how there's the epic and the ritualistic and the realistic all mixed together.
Yeah,
he talked about his relationship with like the communal aspect of culture.
Yeah,
and he goes, take for example the ritualistics of even something like the collective act of cooking ash together. In ash, in certain villages, for example, every household will contribute one ingredient and they'll all blend it together to make the ash and they eat it together. He's like, so even in the aspect of cooking, we observe communal participation in a creative act. And that was what was fascinating to him, was the fact that like cultures and communities coming together to bring their little slice of something together, to put it in an ash together and then enjoy it together. I just want to say, like, behind the scenes of that is just interesting that he was fascinated in the mixing of these.
Yeah.
A tension exists between the different sources of his style. There's the epic, the ritualistic, and the realistic. The first two are rooted in Iranian performance traditions, the tazieh, passion plays, and the latter is in modernist and realist styles of representation. So when he's talked about the influences he gets from Shahnameh and tazieh plays, he said, when I'm working on a film, occasionally I notice, or other people notice, that the roots of what I'm doing are deep in one tradition or another. And I'm very happy that these things are noted. The more we know about these traditions, the richer our cinema will be. Because this goes back to what he said about how film Farsi from him wasn't like intellectually stimulating enough. So he didn't recognize himself in film Farsi. And he wanted his cinema to be a cinema of understanding our culture. Even if we don't understand the film, it's like, let's get a glimpse into like all these different aspects of our culture.
I found it interesting when you said that Beyzaie once said that Iran's
culture is an unknown culture. All the failings of our country arise from not knowing and not understanding the meaning of the lives we live. It's a culture we've lived but haven't analyzed.
I like that. And I was thinking about it yesterday because it sort of came up in conversation with my brother-in-law, where we were talking about how sometimes people outside of Iranian culture will think that they're being clever and think that they've like picked up on something, and will watch a piece of Iranian film or read a poem or something and be like, oh, this is clearly a reference to this other poem that I read, right? They've now read two things of poetry, or they've consumed two pieces of art, and they think that they've drawn this like very deep connection. But then if you ask an Iranian who is like born and raised in that society and in that culture, right? Hey, is this a reference to this poem? They might scoff at the idea and be like, no, this is like a common saying. This is like hundreds of years old. Which to me is like, this person is making that connection as if it's just like, it's nothing. It's just common knowledge. And because these things are common knowledge, these like a lot of these artistic connections, people don't allow themselves this space and the time to sit down and really evaluate, well, why? What does that mean? What is the symbolism behind this? Why is it that the nightingale is singing for the rose? Why is it that Farhad spent his life chiseling his love for Shireen into the side of the mountain? Why is the friend's house in the heart? Like these are common sayings, these are common proverbs, and because we grow up around them, we don't allow ourselves the opportunity to sit down and really examine why.
Right.
I think when he points this out, he's absolutely right. And I think that this is also why it's reflected in his work as someone who spends so much time providing lectures and talks and analyses of Iranian myth and poetry. You know what I mean?
Yeah. He's saying this in the 70s. So he's watching movies in Iran from the 40s, 50s, and 60s and being like, this offers us nothing in terms of culture.
Right.
His personal taste.
Yeah,
I mean, the film Farsi, where it's like a gangster goes and kills this dude with a knife, he was just like, we have this opportunity to use this medium of art to like say something about our culture or teach our future generations about these poems.
Yeah.
And film Farsi like wasn't doing that maybe there's some arguments that there were some films that weren't, but like the intellectuals of the new wave who started making like new wave Iranian cinema, they were like, we can use this medium to like be a little bit more intellectual and teach our kids and grandkids about films. Or about our history. So I think he's also reacting to that stuff. It's like, he just didn't like film Farsi. He's like, yuck.
And to be fair, I think film Farsi will have a retrospective time as well. Like, I think we're starting to see it now, where all of a sudden filmmakers our age are also rediscovering film Farsi, and they're having deep conversations about, okay, well, why was there such an affinity to this type of film? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, I'm excited to have Sina Dolati on for a future episode, because he's a huge defender of film Farsi and feels like that time period of Iranian cinema is almost like a time capsule into society at the time. Those movies would not have been successful if they didn't resonate on some level with audiences.
Yeah.
I have some quotes from Beyzaie. These were released by Janus in the press release. Mm-hmm. In 1974, Beyzaie had established himself not only as Iran's premier playwright, but theater director, and he became one of the most promising filmmakers in the Iranian New Wave movement, which we've talked about in the past. 2 years later, his debut feature, Downpour, had been a hit with critics and audiences alike, proving his combination of forward-looking cinematic aesthetics and trenchant social criticism could appeal to the Iranian public. For his next film, however, Beyzaie wanted to challenge viewers. Now there's a quote here from Beyzaie. During the making and release of Downpour, the equations of commercial and intellectual films were the same. The common morality of the action drama films of the commercial cinema had a tone of political ideology and social activism. The intellectual films were praised for communicating with the mass culture. In that sense, I don't want to be popular. My audiences are those who strive to go one step further, not those who are the guardians of the old equations, nor those who dread self-examination and self-reflexivity. The Stranger in the Fog was inspired by his experiences during the production of Downpour. Beyzaie shot his debut in several Tehran neighborhoods, whose residents viewed the production as a disturbance and regarded the crew with distrust. As critic and curator Amir Hossein Siadat explains in Senses of Cinema, Beyzaie recognized that beneath the facade of seemingly modern city, age-old tribal dynamics persisted. Every neighborhood operated with its own set of customs, or in other words, its own totems and taboos. For Stranger, Beyzaie allegorized these insulated, narrow-minded segments of Iranian society by crafting a story about a man, Ayat, who lands on a village bordering the Caspian Sea. To achieve the film's mythic tenor, the production team crafted a rural society that would resonate in its universal dimensions, a conceit for which the director drew upon his knowledge of Persian culture, cultivated extensively since his early 20s. The Stranger in the Fog possesses diverse, mixed, and even intentionally contradictory geographical and cultural particularities. For example, as Siadat points out, the film's unnamed village lies beside the Caspian Sea, yet its customs differ from those of real-life northern Iran. This kind of goes into what you and I were talking about, Kaveh, about how it's not really a real place. Some of the villagers dress in northern clothing. Others wear those of Lors and Turkmen, who reside in the west and northeast, respectively. Further, the film's soundtrack incorporates musical elements from sundry Iranian regions and cultures, while its indeterminate time period is emphasized by the observations of rituals that were already archaic by 1974. And the villagers unexpectedly speak unaccented Persian rather than the dialects common to the remote location. The tiny, several-person crew on Stranger was young, but more than capable of helping Beyzaie fulfill his vision. Cinematographer Mehrdad Fahimi, who would go on to shoot most of Beyzaie's films until the 90s, was here making his feature debut. And this was the first production for Iraj Raminfar, a future legend of art direction and costume design. So shout out to him. We were calling that out quite a bit as well. Mm-hmm. However, actors Shojazadeh, Manucher Farid, Sami Tahassoni, and Valiullah Shirandami were all seasoned veterans of the stage. According to Siadat, Stranger's reception among Iranian critics and audiences marked a reversal of fortune for Beyzaie. His previous films, including 2 shorts, were held as important works by theatrical director now proving himself master of cinematic medium. But Stranger was considered overly ambitious and stylistically bizarre. Siadat imputes this initial misunderstanding of stranger to the political environment of the 1970s. During the pre-revolutionary period, leftist intellectuals' thinking was dominated by, quote, a commitment to social realism and a deep reverence for the concept of the mass people, writes Siadat, an approach that Stranger, with its mythic overtones and critical allegory of provincial groupthink, openly renounces. After the film's release in Iran, The Stranger in the Fog was screened in the West only once. Oh, guess where, Kaveh?
Germany.
No. At the 1976 Toronto International Film Festival, before being banned by the Iranian government following the 1979 revolution. I have another little piece of BTS here. Both of Beyzaie's parents were poets. His whole family was artistic. His father, Nematullah Beyzaie, had a pen name, which was Zokai. He had an uncle, Adi Beyzaie, who was also a poet. Beyzaie's paternal grandfather and great-grandfather were also well-known poets in Iran. And Beyzaie, as a teenager, would skip class to go to the cinema and watch movies.
My man.
Yeah. So instead of becoming a poet, he decided to become a playwright, and he would draw from traditional Persian theater and poetry. And he began independently researching the origins and history of theater and cinema around the world. And he shot his first few shorts on 8mm film.
Cool. Well put, excellently said, Farhan. You want to jump to critical reactions?
Yeah.
Well, that's an easy one to do because there really aren't any. Other than the stuff you just said right now that Janus has explained about them loving it. But the fact that they loved it enough to think it's an important film to do a 4K restoration of says something about its place in Iranian cinema. But yeah, I don't really have anything else really for critical reactions. So if you're good, we can move forward.
Yeah.
Deeper analysis. What are your thoughts?
I want to know, Kaveh, because you're really good at being able to boil down a film to its theme, like its thematic statement. I've done it too, so I'm curious. To you, what is the thematic statement of Stranger in the Fog?
Thematic statement. I mean, I think one of the big themes here, not as a statement, but let's get there piece by piece, is the idea of community and paranoia. Literally, the film's the two words in the title are talking about the stranger and the fog. I mean, like, let's extract those words from each other. How we treat strangers, how we're taught to mistrust one another, and how that's our own downfall, I think, are themes that he keeps going back to.
That's good.
The idea of like a village that's haunted by traditions, customs, habits, and manners, and a genealogy of fear that they themselves have invented becomes a part of this like straw castle they've built, protecting themselves. We have our customs, we have our traditions. A stranger has come here and interfered with that. We can't trust them. But then that guy comes with his own fears and paranoias, and this all becomes like this circular thing of like self-sabotage, self-destructive behavior. I wanted to quote, can I just go ahead and quote something too? This is from...
Is this related to your thematic statement or is this different?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Hamid Dabashi's book Close Up, Iranian Cinema Past, Present, and Future. He talks about this idea of the fog. And he goes, the protagonist of The Stranger in the Fog is neither Ayat nor Rana. He says it's the fog. In this furiously foggy subjugation of the real can yield alternative versions of itself. The cloudy atmosphere of The Stranger in the Fog represents all the received cognitive categories through which a culture views itself. Remember, because he said, we are a culture that hasn't viewed itself. And the fog is representing this like blockage of us being able to review our own culture.
Oh, that's interesting.
It is then that the symbolic structuring of the universe of imagination called culture is actively mutated through this hazy vision of the real. As a visual projection of the subconscious, Beyzaie uses the fog to melt away the presumed rigidity of the evident. The result is a spectacular alteration of the obvious. After viewing the atmospheric mistiness of The Stranger in the Fog, we can no longer view reality with the same submissive matter-of-factness, thinking there is nothing we can do about it. So when we watch this film, part of the hope is that if you can penetrate yourself to realize that these guys are living in a fog, they're literally living in a fog, how can we go back and view the rest of our own culture and tradition with like a apathetic shrug?
Yeah.
Beyzaie is even today an artist, writer, storyteller of today's revolution and today's youth. Because essentially what you want to bring this back to today's like politics, how can you look at what's happening with the women life freedom movement and be apathetic? How can you shrug your shoulders and be like, that's not my battle, that's not my fight? If you do, as an Iranian artist or person with empathy, you are also living in that same fog he's talking about in 1974. He says, Our undoing as a culture is a fog that exists over all of us that makes us impossible to recognize one another. We view each other as strangers. We view each other as threats when we should really be analyzing, assessing our culture, putting ourselves under a microscope. So the last line is, with the vaporous effusions of the invisible, the authority of sight itself is reconstituted, negotiated anew, implicated in a new hermeneutics of subjectivity.
Who's nudes?
I don't know.
Who's
Hermeneutics.
Herman?
Hermeneutics. You don't know what that means?
No.
It's clearly the branch of knowledge that deals with interpretation, especially of the Bible or literary text.
Clearly not being read off the screen at all.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just quoting from the Dabashi's book, but
Yeah.
I do like what he's saying, and it kind of goes back to what my initial theory was, this idea of community and paranoia and how we treat our strangers.
No, I like
the
it.
stranger and the fog is literally our self-reflective cultural point of view.
I like it.
We view each other as strangers, and we live in a fog.
You ready for my thematic statement?
Please.
Escaping one's responsibility will assuredly bring chaos.
Oh, it's about responsibility, is it?
Yeah.
Expand.
Obviously, Ayat's arrival here, he's escaping his responsibility in some other community, and we don't know what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ayat doesn't even know.
Yeah.
And his escape from there is not only bringing chaos to his own life, but it's also bringing chaos to the people who are harboring him.
Yeah.
Then on top of that, within the community, the family and the in-laws of the woman. Actually, first of all, let's talk about how her ex, he was basically run off by the community. And there's a responsibility by him to his wife to stay and be with her. And he leaves.
Mm-hmm.
So he's abandoned his responsibility to her, and that brings chaos to her life. But then also the community runs him off, and they have a responsibility to protect their own.
Mm-hmm.
And that then brings them further chaos, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then the in-laws have a responsibility to look after Rana and to help with her best interests. But then they abandon that responsibility as well. And you find that every time in this movie that someone is trying to escape their responsibility, even when what I like to call the wraiths come knocking at Ayat's door to be like, hey, we're here to collect, like you have to come with us. And he says no. Like every single time someone turns their back on their responsibility, the degree of chaos in this community is kicked up a notch.
Yeah. No, that's good. I like that.
Yeah.
What about his responsibility, though, to the community where he doubles down and leans in? He tells the young kid who's on crutches that I'm going to build you a house and I'm going to become a working member of this community. And he starts working in the plows, working in the fields, chopping wood.
I think him making that promise is actually him flying in the face of the responsibility that he has to go back and atone for what he did.
Right. Okay.
So I don't think that that's a fair promise that he made to the kid, and he ends up paying for it with the kid's life.
Right. Okay.
And that's why at the end he's like, when they're like, "Oh, that's it, we did it, we won." He's like, "No, there's no winning. They're just going to keep coming back worse and worse and worse until I go and answer for what I've done."
Yeah.
And I think that also shows his growth in a character, because at the beginning of the movie, he's doing everything he can to escape his responsibility.
Yeah.
But at the end of the movie, he's basically sacrificing everything to meet his responsibility.
Yeah.
I have a couple other little things for deeper analysis.
Shoot.
So I was looking into the role of the wolf in Iranian mythology. There's a scene in the movie where they say a wolf has come to town and the townspeople are gone off to fight this wolf. And in that same evening, Rana's husband allegedly appears.
Yeah.
And there's an argument to be made that Rana's husband here is actually the ghost of her husband, or it's physically him and he's been like hiding out in town and now he's like decided to make his way back.
Yeah.
And there's arguments to be made for both. Him and Ayat get into a fight. Rana's ex-husband falls into the water dead and he washes away. And then the next morning, his dead body washes up on shore. So we don't know, is this the dead body washing up on shore from a few years ago when he died? And Ayat just happened to see his ghost the night before, and now the ghost is returning his body as like an omen?
Yeah.
Or did he physically see the husband get into a fight, yada, yada, yada?
And accidentally kill him.
And so the wolf having like two different interpretations of Iranian mythology, actually one works one way for one theory and one works for the other theory, which I think is interesting. So the wolf is sometimes seen as, if it's a positive thing, the wolf is seen as the guardian of spirits. If you make the argument that Rana's husband is a ghost here, then the wolf is here as a guardian of spirits.
Yeah.
The other interpretation of the wolf in Iranian mythology is that wolves are bad and they're messengers of Ahriman, which is essentially the devil in really old Persian myth, which was eventually also adopted into Zoroastrianism.
Mm-hmm.
If Rana's ex-husband is there and physically there, and we see them get into a fight and Ayat murders this guy to basically like try to steal his life, then you can make the argument that the wolf here is a messenger of Ahriman.
Yeah. Well, and which one do you land on?
I keep going back and forth on it. It's like, it's hard for me to make a decision on it. But like the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, it's legit. Then the second time I was like, no, it's a ghost. And you and I have had discussions, and I had discussions with people at the theater, and I genuinely can't tell which one it's supposed to be. Part of me thinks that he did physically show up and that the wolf is a messenger of the devil, only because the wolf is always seen as bad in Shahnameh. It being a guardian of spirits is in other works of text. And I know that Beyzaie is like a massive scholar of Shahnameh. So that's kind of, I'm using like a very meta take to make that point. But I don't know. What do you think?
I think like it's up for interpretation. Both ideas are acceptable. I really like personally believing in the fact that it's a ghost because I feel like with the mysticism, the fable elements, the fairy tale elements of this all, I love the idea that somehow this guy had a divine intervention with the ghost, and by having this interaction, now the ghost feels his body can return.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he feels threatened by the new husband, but it's also like, okay, she's moved on. Like my body can, I just like that element of it. Like my body can return. I see that like the harmony, like I've been replaced or something. Like he doesn't like it.
And the funny thing with the ghost thing is like, even if you go with the ghost thing, then the question is, why did the ghost return the body? Is it because the ghost felt, okay, she's married now she can be at peace. Here's my body back. You can bury it.
Yeah.
Or is he saying, I don't approve of this. I'm going to throw my dead body at you to remind you what you guys did to me.
Yeah. Well, here, okay, let me just put a really funny side tangent story. For any Leaf fans listening to this, you'll really like this. There's a famous hockey player in Leafs history called Bill Barilko. Okay? Mm-hmm. Got your attention here? He was a defenseman who played for the Leafs. And in 1951, he went missing after a car accident that he was in a car. I think he fell into a river or something, or went into a lake and crashed.
Mm-hmm.
And he was presumed dead, but his body was never found.
I think I know where this is going.
And the Leafs were one of the most winning Stanley Cup teams ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
In 1951, his body went missing, and the Leafs had won some of the most cups ever. And his body went missing for 11 years. And in those 11 years, the Leafs did not win another Stanley Cup. His body was found in 1962. They uncovered it from the lake. 11 years later, the year they uncovered his body, the Leafs won the first Stanley Cup. So the joke or comment had become, it was the curse of Bill Barilko, because the Leafs would not win the Stanley Cup until his body was recovered. And this is only tangentially related, but I like this idea of like, the body cannot be found and returned yet until something has been done.
Right.
And the ghost is appearing to see what the status of this town is. And now that he's made his comment, I just like the ghost story elements. You never see ghost stories in Iranian films, and I like to believe in that because I can see the tangential connection of how the body will not be found until the ghost can make his peace with what's going on.
Yeah. And I'm going to make another Baha'i reference.
Yeah.
Body is seen as the temple of the soul.
Yeah.
So if the body is lost, then his soul is wandering. But once the body returns, then his soul can also be put to rest.
Yeah. That's great.
Okay, so I have a couple things here about how Beyzaie keeps making movies about people, like strangers showing up and like messing up the harmony of a town.
Yep.
So this draws from two different motifs in literature. Mm-hmm. So one of them is the motif of the uninvited guest.
Okay.
And the other is the motif of the outside disruption. Mm-hmm. So the uninvited guest is a term sometimes used to describe stories where an outsider or a stranger arrives, often uninvited, and their presence causes unintended disruption. This could be a literal guest or a metaphorical one, such as a new idea or influence that disturbs the existing order. And then the outsider disruption. This theme is a general way to describe narratives where an outsider, whether a person or a supernatural being, enters a community or family and unintentionally causes chaos or conflict. So they're like essentially the same things with different words.
Yeah.
And I find that this is true with Stranger in the Fog, Downpour, and Bashu.
Yeah.
I also was able to source 2 stories from Shahnameh that kind of play into both of these. Do you know the story of Bijan or Siavash?
Remind me. I'm getting them mixed. There's 2 separate stories, right?
2 separate stories, yeah.
Uh,
So Bijan, I'll tell you the Bijan story first. Bijan is more in line with Stranger in the Fog and Downpour.
okay.
So Bijan is a Persian nobleman who travels to Turan. Turan is like a rival kingdom. So Bijan's a Persian nobleman who travels to Turan to help resolve a conflict involving wild boars. His arrival in Turan, where he meets and falls in love with Manije, the daughter of Afrasiab, leads to chaos. Manije secretly helps Bijan enter her father's palace, and the two begin a forbidden love affair. When Afrasiab discovers this, he imprisons Bijan in a deep pit and exiles Manije. The situation brings turmoil to both their lives, and only through the heroic efforts of Rostam is Bijan eventually rescued and peace restored. So there's some elements of that you can see in Stranger in the Fog and Downpour.
Yeah, there's crossover. Yeah. Is that Shahnameh?
That's from Shahnameh, yeah.
So yeah, that's from the. That's when he's talking about how he borrows elements from Shahnameh and Tassiyah plays.
Yeah.
That's probably the elements he's specifically drawing from.
Yeah. And then the other story is the story of Siavash. This is also from Shahnameh. And this one I find is more Bashu and Stranger in the Fog, less so Downpour. But
yeah.
So Siavash is a prince who, after being falsely accused of a crime by his stepmother, Sudabe, chooses exile to avoid conflict. He eventually arrives at the court of Afrasiab, the king of Turan, where he is initially welcomed as a guest. However, his presence in the Turanian court eventually leads to tensions and strife. Afrasiab's jealousy and suspicion towards Siavash grow, culminating in the tragic betrayal and murder of Siavash, which leads to further chaos and long-lasting enmity between Iran and Turan. If you take elements of this and elements of Bijan and like mix them together, you basically get the plot of Stranger in the Fog.
Yeah, totally.
So one other thing was just going back to what Siadat was saying about modernity and what Beyzaie said about modernity, how he was in Tehran and they were in these like older communities within the city, but they had all these weird old archaic practices. And this was why, remember in our group chat, when the conversation came up that maybe he's supposed to be a stand-in for modernity coming in and disrupting the town.
Yeah.
When Afra first asked that question, he asked it as if like modernity was like a bad thing and ruining it. And I was like, I get the hunch that Beyzaie is the type of person who might actually look at modernity in these dogmatic towns as more of a good thing. Whereas someone like Merjoui sees it as more of a bad thing. And having now read Beyzaie's quote on it, I feel a little vindicated in that he's seeing it as like, yeah, he is also a stand-in for like modernity, but like the problem here isn't his modernity as much as it is the dogma of the local community, which I thought was fascinating because I feel like someone like Merjoui would argue the opposite point with the same analogy.
Right.
It could also be a commentary on how foreign intervention will upset the order in a community, but I don't think that was the intended commentary, but I think you could make that argument.
Yeah, you can make that in retrospection.
Yeah.
Cool. Good stuff all around. See what you can come up with when you've had a few weeks to process a film rather than watching it the night before in a fucking mad dash scramble with bloodshot eyes until 3 a.m. Best scene. There's so many scenes I like that I can't really land on one, but I really remember seeing myself falling into the rhythm of the film and really enjoying it when he starts doing the trials. Remember the 3 trials?
Yeah, those are fun. I like those.
One's a tug of war contest. One's a drinking contest against the biggest guy there. And what was the third one? It was like almost like a sword fighting. It was almost like with wooden sticks, right? It's like fencing, I think.
Oh yeah. And he like trips up or something.
Yeah, that I really like that, and I really like the scene when they're having that domestic dispute about like he's jealous over this, like you still love your ex-husband. Those 2 scenes made me feel like, oh, I get this film now. I get the rhythm. It's like the mythological trials, almost like the trials of Hercules.
Trials of Rostam, how dare you?
Trials of Rostam, yeah. Mixed with like the kitchen sink drama of you still love your ex-husband, I know. But those, I think, so like either one of those could be my favorite scene. It's when I started really feeling like, oh, I can relax into this film. I get where it's going. I get it now.
That's good. Mine was there's a scene where the wraiths first arrive to collect him,
Yeah.
and they're talking about this like mysterious master that they have, and they're like, all belongs to him. He sent us, and like they don't know the reason that they're here to collect Ayat.
Yeah.
All they know is that they're like, the master sent us here to collect you.
Right.
That's all that matters. Like, we don't care what your excuses are.
Yeah.
And Ayat refuses, and they're like, okay, we will let him know. Like, they're not even like allowed to take action. They're like, we're here to collect you. If you're saying no, fine, we're going to go tell him. And Ayat tries to explain that he has a family now and all this stuff. And the wraiths are like, we don't care about your excuses. The master will make a decision. And then they leave. And that scene to me was like, it was such a cool scene.
Yeah.
Like when that scene came out, I was like, whoa. Because these like
Gangster.
4 wraith-like figures show up like out of the darkness.
Yeah.
And they're just so imposing. And Ayat immediately is like petrified. And he's starting to sort of remember like maybe who these people are. And it's your first real look into the world beyond the fog, which I thought was super cool.
You know, it's funny because I just had Farnas just saying that a new, deeper analysis that I think is actually very fitting. I think that you're going to like this a lot.
Hit me.
Maybe Ayat was meant to have died in whatever battle he was fighting in previously. And he survives this and is on the boat and is brought back to health because the community saves his life. What if it's a final destination thing of these guys are specters from the beyond being like, you're supposed to come with us. The master, he has told us. We don't know why. We don't care why. You're coming back with us. And it's death that is calling him.
That's cool.
Saying that you weren't meant to be on this island. You were meant to have died. You're lucky that this community brought you back from the brink of death. But this is not the order of things. We're here to call you back. And it's almost like demonic angels of death or angels of whatever, right?
Yeah.
Calling him back. And he's refusing. He's like, I'm not going with you. He goes, fine. If that's the message you want us to send back, we will. But this isn't over yet.
Yeah.
Because he wants you back. Couldn't death be really interesting? And because then he ends up going back on the boat, injured, right?
Yeah, that's true.
He gets mortally wounded and returns back to the boat and returns back. So like then he finally goes to his destination. And I'm just thinking this now. There could be a very clear-cut line drawn between this was a guy who was meant to have died and is choosing life instead of death.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. I like that.
All right, damn, that's poetry. I mean, even though I just did a mic drop of awesome poetry right there for you. Discuss our favorite quotes from the film. I had a lot, but I think if I wanted to break it down to one single line, it's the moment I actually took a picture of it and made it my Instagram. Maybe we can share it on our Instagram. But when she says to him, no one is coming for you. Which can be a positive or negative line. It's the scene when like he's convinced that they're going to return. He's seen them twice at night. But then after a long while, no sign of them returning is happening. And the rest of the village is returning back to normal life.
Right.
But he can't. He's stuck. He's held up. And Rana turns to Ayat and says, like, they're staring at the mountain. It's a beautiful shot. And she just simply says, no one is coming for you. And it's both of those things. It's just like, no one's going to come and save you, but no one's coming after you either. You might as well trudge forward. Like, no one else in this village is going to come and help you. I'm not going to come and help you out of this. I've told you multiple times. But also at the same time goes, there's nothing to fear. You know, I just like in my interpretation, that sentence can carry either light or dark.
Yeah, no, I like it. And it ties into your analysis of like, maybe he was meant to die.
Yeah.
My favorite quote is when the in-laws are all telling Rana that she can't get remarried. And then finally her sister-in-law, like who the whole time has been like dunking on Ayat, being like, don't trust this guy, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Finally, she like rips her shirt open. The sister-in-law rips her own shirt open and she's like, look how I've like withered away.
Yeah.
And like what's happened to me. And then she rips part of her shirt and she shows like she's still young. And then she says to Rana, don't listen to anyone, Rana. You do what's right for you. No one knows what a single woman raising a child is like. I was like, yo.
Yeah.
And especially like 70s Iran.
Yeah.
12 out of 10.
Well, and Bahram Beyzaie also you mentioned the same thing of him having the foresight of realizing the power dynamics in Downpour.
Right. Yeah.
He's very conscious of that, the role women play and how they should be respected.
Yeah.
Favorite performance? Can you guess mine?
It's either Ayat or Rana.
Yeah, but who do you think it is, knowing me?
Rana.
Parvana Masumi's performance is so powerful. Other than the fact that in another life we would have been happily married, she's capable of communicating so much with stillness. And man, her eyes, she's got beautiful eyes. In both this and Downpour, how she just like, it's stillness and the glances that she takes. Long glances. When she's first trying to figure out who Ayat is and she's just watching him as she goes about her like daily chores throughout the village and she's just watching him. Mm-hmm. She's overwhelmed with outpourings of emotion. She's conflicted. Mm-hmm. She's grieving, but at the same time, she's starting to fall in love with this guy. At the same time, she has a sense of duty.
Yeah.
I don't know. She's so great. Her eyes are so great. And she does so much beautiful acting in the stillness of her performance, which is very difficult to do. So yeah, Parvana Masumi for me.
Nice. It's a toss-up for me between her and Khosrow Shujazadeh, who plays Ayat. So just special shout out to him as well. I thought he did an excellent job. Also, there's the little boy character who has the crutches the whole movie. He was very good. I liked him a lot.
He was good, yeah. Yeah, he's good. Nitpicks, hot takes. What aged poorly? Where we boil down to just one nitpick each for the sake of runtime. And we don't talk about subtitles or continuity errors. I have one minor one.
Okay.
Some of the performances in the acting, I think involuntarily drew laughter from the crowd when it's not supposed to. Did you get that sense during the screening?
Oh, for sure. For sure.
And there's a few times where it's leaning into the melodrama so much, or like, especially when Ayat accuses Rana's brother-in-law for being in love with him. It's like, isn't it you who's in love with him now that the brother's dead? And he's like, and like he runs away like offended.
Yeah.
That drew laughter from a modern audience, and I don't think that was the intention. And I think that's slightly the performance and the direction is like, it didn't age well. I guess this isn't a nitpick.
That one might have been meant to be a little humorous.
Fine, maybe, but a lot of them,
you're right.
Like screaming, waving. That's the what aged poorly, and I don't mean problematic. It's not a problematic thing that didn't age poorly, but like
stylistically,
there were definitely times when people were laughing when they shouldn't have been.
But this is the like the campiness of it, right? Like it's very similar. If you watch a lot of movies from the 50s, like you watch like the 10 Commandments, Ben-Hur, Cleopatra, like you watch those movies and you'll get performances that are so over the top and melodramatic because a lot of those actors and directors started off in theater and now they're doing this.
Yeah.
And in theater, you have to do these bigger performances. One, it's like part of the culture of the show. But two, if you are packing like 200-300 people in the audience, like the person at the back of the audience needs to be able to tell what's going on as well, right? So you have to be big.
Yeah.
So I think that this ties into that. And this also ties into like overall my view of Beyzaie stylistically is like there's a lot of camp, there's a lot of melodrama, there's a lot of like over the topness of it, which is why like half of this movie is just people yelling.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, I know. It just I think it doesn't age as well as you would hope.
Yeah.
What's your one nitpick taken up what aged poorly?
I love how with the Beyzaie movie I'm gonna have a list of nitpicks. Honestly, the biggest one I had was exactly what you mentioned, that I think the camp and the melodrama was sometimes a little much.
Yeah. And
led to like lots of yelling, lots of like weird reactions and stuff. The only other one that I'll mention is the raid sequence at the end. The like blocking of it was sometimes really confusing, and the like logic behind what was going on, where people were, how people were reacting. Some of the logic in the raid I think could have been worked out a little bit better and like blocked a little bit better. To be fair, it's a very complicated sequence.
Yeah.
And it's only his second feature film. So like I don't know if I could have done any better if I have a scene like that in my second film.
Right.
So like I'm not going to fault him on it, but like if I'm looking for things that I'm like going to complain about, that's one of them.
Fair.
I want to resurrect a section of the podcast that we've done twice.
Oh, no. Oh, Festivals of Cannes?
No, it's called Questions.
Questions, okay.
Okay. Why do you think the town ran off Rana's husband?
I don't know. I thought he went off on his own to do something.
But then it's revealed later that the town actually ran him off.
Yeah, it's a good question. We should call this section Good Questions. No, I don't know.
So you have no answer. Okay, when did Ayat get hit? Because he's like mortally wounded, and we know at some point in the raid he gets hit, but we don't see him get hit. He's running, and then all of a sudden he just drops, and I was like, "What?
Oh
what
yeah,
hit him?"
yeah, I remember. Yeah, I don't know.
So you didn't see that either.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I don't know. No,
Okay. Also, why does the last wraith kill himself?
I just assumed that he's outnumbered. He's not going to get out of this alive.
So he just like kills him. He like screams and stabs himself in the face.
It's like that samurai thing of the seppuku,
Yeah.
honorable death because you take your own life, and like the feudal Japanese, that thing of like you're not going to get out of this. I mean, usually it's done in the face of great shame, but maybe it's in reference to that. There is a lot of like samurai style stuff here. So.
That was definitely a moment where the audience, I think, like burst into laughter because I think everyone was confused by that decision.
Right. Yeah.
It's like the last wraith is left standing in this raid.
Yeah.
He gets cornered, and it's a tight shot, so I couldn't tell if like, oh, maybe he got stabbed in the back, and it's too painful, so he just kills himself, or like what? But he gets around it, and then all of a sudden he goes, ah, and then he stabs himself in the face, and he drops dead. And I was like, what the hell just happened?
Don't think I haven't figured out what you've done here.
They're not nitpicks.
You've just taken your nitpicks and you've invented a new section called questions where you can just continue with your nitpicks.
I've done questions before. These are questions. I said, did he kill himself or not?
Double feature lineup. What would you make this a double feature lineup with? Or should I go first?
You go first. I have mine, but I'm curious what yours is.
I would say Seven Samurai because aesthetically, the way the village is comprised, the themes of duty and identity. There's also themes of the unity and the nature of war are both themes in Seven Samurai in this. And individual and accountability. So I think there's a lot of crossover here. And I think, Seven Samurai is a black and white film, but I almost feel like if it were to be shot in color, it would look a lot like this. So those are my two. This and Seven Samurai.
Aesthetically, do you think this is closer to Seven Samurai or The Cow? Just aesthetically, like story-wise.
Oh, no, aesthetically,
yeah. And thematically, I would say this is definitely closer, but aesthetically.
Yeah. This aesthetically, probably.
Interesting. I feel like The Cow is definitely closer to Seven Samurai.
No, I'm saying The Cow.
Oh, okay.
The Cow is more aesthetically.
Okay. My double feature lineup, I was running through a few, like I considered Shutter Island at one point, Get Out, Pan's Labyrinth, but I ended up landing on White Meadows. Because instead of a movie about a confused stranger arriving to a remote community, it's about a man who knows all visiting multiple communities.
Yeah.
And both feature a unique culture and practices and rituals. But in one case, he's unknowingly sent by a higher mystical power.
Yeah.
In the other, it's presented like he is such, but it's actually just a guy exploiting the dogma of these communities. So I think like those two movies kind of act as foils for one another.
Yeah, that's very nice. It's almost like the yin and yang.
Yeah.
Excellent. Final thoughts and grades.
I'm very curious what your grade is for this film.
Well, I give it an A-.
Wow. I was not expecting that.
I really like it. I think from my perspective, in terms of the epic scale of the film, again, and this is the 4K restoration. I would not have given the version we saw an A-.
Yeah.
But I think it's an incredibly powerful film. It's beautifully shot. It's really beautifully shot. The colors, the way he gets 50, 60 people, extras on the way he frames them and shoots them, the mystery surrounding it. There's so much to interpret. I think this film needs to be watched again and again by people and like dissected. It's just like a really good, complex novel. Like you said Miyazaki at one point, right?
Yeah, Miyazaki.
Yeah, it's got like a really good, it reminds me of a good Miyazaki novel.
Yeah.
So I think anything south of an A would be blasphemy. Now, what'd you give it?
It's, it's funny.
C+.
This is for you. This is the lowest grade you've ever given a Beyzaie film.
Well, I love Downpour. It's an A+.
And Bashu, you gave an A.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I will call this the worst Beyzaie film I've ever seen.
That's so funny. I'm calling this the best Beyzaie film I've ever seen.
Wow. See, because you've seen it twice. That's part of the reason,
No,
too.
it's not. No,
I'm
it's
telling
not.
you.
It's not.
Yes, I'm telling you 100%. Okay, but go on. It just so happens that the film,
No,
the Beyzaie
no,
film you've seen twice. Gets the
And
highest
I'll
rate.
tell you why. I think for me, the amount of allegory just packed in this film alone just does things to my brain where like I get like brain tingle. I like movies that have rich worlds of story, that have unique culture and like their own rules of engagement.
Yeah.
It's no surprise that I'm a big fan of like Marvel movies or Lord of the Rings or The Godfather or Harry Potter or Star Wars, is because I'm drawn to movies and stories that have their own interesting worlds with their own rules and cultures and rituals and stuff. And I think that Beyzaie does a very good job at painting this scene and creating this world. The cinematography is also amazing. We talked about the production design and the costume designs. It was all great. There's a few things that bumped me on the film a little bit. Some of the performances were a little over the top, and so that definitely bumped it down for me. Some of the music I found was a little annoying. Some of it I liked, but some of it I was like, oh, this is grating. Like the wailing from the kid at the beginning, I was like, this is terrible.
Okay.
But then some of the drumming sequences, I was like, oh, this is really cool. So for me, the movie kind of like teeters around an A-, which puts this above Downpour for me, which I gave a B- to, and it's above Boshu for me, which I gave a C to. So this... overall, big fan of the movie, which means our show average from Cinema Rex for Stranger in the Fog is A-.
In A Stranger in the Fog, the harmonious life of a fishing village is disturbed by a group of strangers arriving by sea, whose presence throws into question the established order, threatening the community's very existence. It's justified in often thinking of Beyzaie's work as impenetrable at first and challenging to dissect. Stranger in the Fog is Beyzaie's most mythologically narrated film, perhaps next to Ballad of Tara, drawing on a number of ancient Iranian mythological narratives. The film is a fairy tale, a fable, much like most of Beyzaie's work, but despite this film's allegorical implications, has a profoundly earthy quality. Stranger in the Fog is on one front a romance that lives in the twilight zone of land, sea, life and death, reality and myth. A village that is haunted by traditions, customs, habits, and manners. A genealogy of fear that they themselves have invented. Let me know if that sounds familiar. The fog, the cloudy atmosphere, representing all the received cognitive categories through which a culture views itself. Hats off to Beyzaie for always trying to enlighten his audience with his films. To our audience, thank you for tuning in.
Thank you very much, audience.
Farhan, you know how I feel about you.
Unfortunately.
And to everyone else, be omid didar.
Bye. Also, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. You have the app open right now. You're listening to us. Just give us a thumbs up or write, I like this podcast. Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Sadinejad.